All right. Hello, everybody. Shall we begin? Welcome. Thanks for coming. I, I haven't done anything yet. I haven't done a thing. It's all downhill from there. Thank you. This morning I woke up and I realised because Paul's not here that I have to introduce myself, and because I'm the acting director of the Centre for Creative and Cultural Research. Paul returns next week. And so it's not a sort of, so I can sort of welcome you to the first of the Centre for Creative and Cultural Research seminars for semester 2. So welcome to that. And also, so there's a sense of occasion and it's not a one-woman show. I thought I'd introduce myself with this. So, Dr. Cathy Hope is the acting director of the Centre for Creative and Cultural Research, and normally the deputy director. She is the engagement and impact director and the coordinator of the play. Oh, so classy, always so classy. Anyway, of the Play Creativity and Wellbeing Project in the Centre for Creative and Cultural Research in the fabulous Faculty of Arts and Design at UC. Cathy's research informs and supports the local creative industries and uses creative-led approaches to improve place and well-being outcomes, particularly in Canberra. She is Miss CBR or Ms. CBR. She has facilitated co-facilitated hundreds of playful projects with and for the Canberra community in partnership with local government, industry and community, and she tells me she considers herself incredibly lucky. Thanks, Cathy. By the way, I really admire you. No. So today I'm here to talk about the transformative power of the arts, looking at creative placemaking and creative play in Haig Park. Just want to start with a video, it's short. Easier. Yep, beautiful. Now we'll do the same on the other side. Oh. Makes me cry every single time I see it. It's really embarrassing. Anyway, mind you, there's way too much alcohol in that video, so you can it's just way too much alcohol. So I didn't actually have creative control over that. If I did, less alcohol and more shots of community. So I'm playing that to you because it gives you a sense of possibly the spectacle of Haig Park Experiments, but not what I would like to really focus on today is the careful thought and the creative-led projects, that drove the transformation of the park. So this is a story of a park. It's called Haig Park, and the transformation from one of the most unsafe, unloved and underused parks in Canberra to a much loved community hub, particularly in the Braddon area, and what we were hoping to achieve, which is everybody's backyard. So this is a slideshow buffet. I couldn't help myself. There are so many beautiful images and so many great stories to tell. So we'll be whizzing through a lot of images because I really want this to be an homage to the power of the creative and cultural industries as a mechanism for social change. And also a homage to the ACT creatives and the ACT community and UC staff who helped to design and deliver this project. And so every single shot you see is an idea had by an ACT creative or UC staff member and executed, or member of the community and also executed by the same, which is extraordinary. So I had a long spiel about how I came to embrace play as the focus of my research. And I've moved it out because really this is about Haig Park. But I want to just plant this in your mind now, just about play, which is play. Often people think of play as an activity, but really it's a mode of experience. It's a way of engaging the world and engaging with the world no matter what you're doing. And I've got two quotes here which have kind of underpinned the way I think about play. One thanks to BT, introducing me to Haraway. The first one is by Thomas Hendricks, and it says, "Play is the laboratory of the possible. To play fully and imaginatively is to step sideways into another reality between the cracks of ordinary life. Things are dismantled and built anew." And then as a mode of experience, play makes an opening, play proposes. Thank you. So play has some conditions that define it from other modes of experience. The first one, and this is really important, is that sense of safety and security. It is very hard to play when you feel stressed or under threat. Also agency. So you need to voluntarily engage in play. And for those of you who have kids, and when your kids force you to play a game and you're just not in the mood, and so you're pretending to play, but you're actually not experiencing play. So it's not play if you don't want to play. The third one's really important, which is about invitation or permission. So often with play, there are familiar elements. There might be some rules or parameters that provide entry points, or even something aesthetic that provides an entry point to play and also gives you a sense of how you might play. So there's familiar elements, and then at the same time, you've got this there's elements of the condition of disruption and reconfiguration. So you might have new or novel elements that help to make play different from ordinary life. And the two, that invitation, permission, and the disruption and configuration often come together, and we brought them together in this project. And importantly, play is intrinsically motivated. So we play first and foremost for the feeling of play itself, rather than for extrinsic or outcomes-driven reasons, which is what sets play apart, like playing a game with friends from playing professional sport. And then positive effect. It does make us feel good in some way. What constitutes positive effect is different between the players. So happiness, flow, it could be a feeling of release or escape. And so when you look at these conditions of play, it really highlights, the very subjective, highly subjective quality of play. From safety, what's safe for one person isn't safe for another. The sense of agency, what the invitations, they differ from one person to another, and also what constitutes a positive feeling. And so play rests squarely with the player rather than the environment. And so for someone like myself who is trying to design an environment or affordances that encourage play, it's pretty complex. I just wanted to show you this example of an intentional design to encourage what I've just described. This is called Puckleball. It's by Johan Strom in Sweden. And it's essentially like a Dr. Seuss-like play on soccer. And so he wrote, the unevenness of the field is intended to invite more imaginative ways to play and to encourage play between girls and boys, old and young, skilled against unskilled, on equal footings, challenging the physical elitism inherent in most sporting activities. But serious footballers find it useful too for practice in responding to unpredictability. And so this, is an example of where there are, those invitations to play. You know what it looks like, but when you engage with it, really you can't, you can't focus on the outcome. You're just focusing on the activity itself. So after I found play at about 2014 BT, 2015 maybe, I did start to work with the ACT government. I did a few desktop studies on urban activation and on play spaces to inform renewal in the ACT. And alongside that, I conducted community engagement with thousands and thousands of Canberrans, little ones, big ones, old ones, to inform the design of 3 nature play sites in the ACT. A really amazing project, which was looking at designing 5 whole of suburb play master plans. So we identified suburbs that had very low play value, and we worked on how could we bring greater play value across the entire suburb. And then this came along, this whopping great project, Haig Park Experiments in 2019. City Renewal Authority put out a tender for a job, 6 months, $1 million budget. I'm just going to add 6 months. We had $1 million, 6 months. And the purpose was to design temporary events and activities alongside temporary installations to test and trial what works to inform permanent renewal in this place. So for those of you who don't know Haig Park, this is the beginnings. It was planted between 1921 and 23 as a shelter belt, and you can see it there, just how barren the country is there, to stop the wind and dust from blowing into the city, into the inner city, as they were building it. So this is its planting structure, 14 rows of trees, 9 species, and as it said before, this is basically like nearly, 1.8, nearly 2 kilometres long. So this is a long, thin park. So there were originally 7,000 trees, but now they've been sort of thinned out, and there's about 2,300. If you don't know where it is, it's located, you can see it there, 1.5 k's from City Hill, and it runs between Ainslie and then Braddon and Turner. And this is what it looks like. That's what Haig Park looks like. So why was the City Renewal Authority working? Thank you. Why did they want to renew this space? It was really about the future of Canberra and about infill. So this was part of Canberra's urban densification program, predicting that hoping that about 30,000 residents would move into the inner city. And because of that, most of that would be apartment or townhouse living. And for those of you who know Braddon, I mean, apart from the roundabout, there is no public realm. So it was going to be public realm for Braddon, but also all of these new residents. And then Haig Park is the key green space for these new residents. But the reality of Haig Park then was that it was unsafe, it was unloved, and it was underused. It had a terrible reputation as a very unsafe spot. It was nicknamed Rape Park. It was the site for antisocial behaviour, drug deals, it was a sex beat. I heard a lot of stories, anecdotal stories of physical and sexual violence in the park, and it still sends chills down my spine. Like I heard a story of a jet who said that if he went out on a Saturday night and he was feeling angry, he would go to Haig Park because he knew he would have a fight with somebody. I heard stories of women who were coming home from ANU, and because it's so long to go around, it just takes so much effort. So what she would do is get to the side of the park. She would pretend that somebody was across the other side, and she would wave at them and run. Hi, yes, I'm coming. This is how terrified people were of it. And I heard one story, which was so traumatic that person is never recovered. And so this is the legacy of this place. So the government commissioned a utilisation study in 2018, and what they found was that the majority of users were mostly men, adult men, so aged between 25 and 45. And at the same time, and just before we started that project, the Canberra Women's Safety Map conducted an audit, and as I said, Haig Park was like noted as the most unsafe park on that map. And the community felt that the trees really played a significant role in making it unsafe because they were like forests where people could hide. Okay, so going back to those play conditions, we had our task set for us. So if you think about safety, as I said, this was like considered one of the most unsafe parks in Canberra. In terms of agency, in terms of volunteering to want to be in that space, most people used it as a thoroughfare because they had to, not because they wanted to. I mean, there were people who lived around the park that did engage with it, but for the majority of people, according to the community engagement, it was something they had to do. There weren't many invitations or permissions to play. There was no amenity. There was a toilet, and people really hated the toilet. The park's reputation alone was a repellent. The trees were like a forest of fear, and they were also heritage protected, which meant that if you wanted to engage with them in interesting ways, you know, not just walk around them or sit under them, you needed permission to do so. And of course, just from an aesthetic point of view, like there were so few opportunities for disruption and reconfiguration because we're talking about 2 k's of straight lines of trees and then an homogeneity of users. And I remember standing in the park just thinking, oh my God, how are we going to activate this place? I just had no idea. And then in terms of that motivation, it was extrinsic more than intrinsic, as in I am walking from A to B, not I want to be in here. I've got to walk the dog, so I'll have to walk it in Haig Park. I mean, this is a generalization. A lot of people had warm feelings, and the people who had warm feelings like did their best to scare us out of there because they wanted the park to stay as it was. But for most people, that was the experience. And of course, negative effect, fear, loneliness, emptiness, or just no feeling about it at all. So we had a creative challenge. How can we change perceptions of the park? And we were never asked to change the realities of the park, just the perceptions. But of course, to change perceptions, we did need to alter the reality of that place. How can we encourage more users, more diverse users to use the park more often and for longer? And how can we enable community to use the park in many different ways, this park? And then on top of that, and importantly, how can we improve safety and how can we grow a sense of community around this when there's no amenity and people don't like the place? Thank you. So we know, like from place studies, that the identity of places are formed through individual and social memory and experience. And of course, Haig Park's identity was long held and extremely negative. And so we had to find ways to reconfigure people's experience of the park and create these multiple new and diverse positive memories. And that was our starting point. And we had to do it in 6 months. I'm going to say 6 months, a lot. So we had a go at experimenting with a few methodologies, but the one that I want to focus on is creative placemaking. So just simply, creative placemaking is the use of the arts or the creative and cultural industries to solve community issues by bringing together diverse partners around a place. And it differs from traditional placemaking, which tends to be focused on design and infrastructure. And instead, what you've got, when you take on creative placemaking, you're using arts-led, socially engaged processes to encourage that deeper level of public participation and agency. Thank you. So, creative placemaking. We use the creative and cultural industries as the tools. So if play were the conditions, then the creative and cultural industries were the tools. And what we wanted to do was generate these playful, positive disruptions. And as we know, the arts are a great space for experimentation and also a place where you can explore ambiguities and complexities because it was going to be a big journey to get people from here to here without working with some of those on the way. But the problem with the arts is they can be exclusionary. Not everybody likes the arts. Not everybody wants to engage in the arts. Some people find it hard to read and interpret the arts, and that can be a barrier to engagement. So we fused the arts with inclusive play to create what was creative play. We had players, and they were all from the creative industry. So I built a consortium. They were cross-sector. ACT government, the education, not just here, but also primary school and college and high school, the non-profit sector, Ainslie and Gorman Arts Centre, and we had industry, landscape architecture and events. And then, of course, all the staff who work in the Faculty of Arts and Design, some of you who are here today. And then we set up a Haig Park Advisory Committee led by the fabulous Professor Jen Webb, and we had representatives from all of the industries that we thought were important. So we had lots of input. And we also had this. So this was a place plan designed out of the community engagement conducted by the ACT government, and it captured all of the, it captured the aspirations, the current uses and the aspirations for that place by community. And so that was our guide about what community might like. And so for this presentation, and there's a hell of a lot of slides, I'm going to work through some of those conditions of play and see how we activated that. So the first one and one of the most critical ones is safety. And so we asked the United Ngunnawal Elders Council if they would be the cultural guides of the project, and they agreed. And Auntie Ros Brown, who was may still well be, the UC Elder in Residence and the co-chair of the United Ngunnawal Elders Council, took on this role. And so the first thing that happened was that the park, we had a smoking ceremony throughout the park to actually, to bring in, to cast away the bad spirits, to quote Wally Bell, and to bring in the good spirits, and to, to actually make this place feel safe for people. And we also used the United Ngunnawal Elders Council Charter as our kind of our moral and guide and, our values guide. And so that charter is really about inclusivity, about everyone being welcome, and about relationship to country. Then we had these fabulous people. So this is where we started in terms of employment of creatives. So these are our caretakers. All of them were creatives, and they all dressed in these jade lab coats, and they worked in pairs, wandering through the park just in an everyday way, keeping an eye on it, like creating a human presence. And then if you were in the park and they saw you and you looked like you were okay to be approached, they'd come and say hi and have a chat. The idea was just to start, creating that sense of people being in there in a more everyday way. And the other thing we did was the park was just full of signs of abuse and substance use, cigarette butts, needles, broken glass everywhere. And then that was also gave people a sense of not feeling safe in that space. And so we brought in Trash Mob, and we did a lot of cleaning up ourselves, and we brought in community groups like Trash Mob, who are now called Trash Gather, and they just did this fantastic deep clean of some of those spaces. And then we fed them and loved them and took care of them as a thanks. So we tried to make the place safe. And then in terms of the conditions of play, around invitation and permission, this was the really tricky one. But of course, the first one and the most fundamental of this is that it had to be free, because if it's not free, that is an instant barrier. So it was, not only was it free, but it was not even, I think about maybe 2% of the program was ticketed. So basically every single program we were running, people were welcome to, people could come to. So we had, you can't see it there, we had 26 experiments. I'm going to say 6 months again. We got a little bit ambitious, but we had these 26 experiments in part in response to the Haig Park Place Plan, because there were so many things that people wanted to see in the park, but also because we wanted to create those multiple entry points for people and not just have these big events, but actually everyday activity. So we had these 3 phases. It's the welcome phase, and then the discovery phase, and then the celebration phase. Okay, now these guys were where we started in terms of our project. So we had a community welcome, and the park, the United Ngunnawal Elders Council conducted a smoking ceremony. The one thing that we knew, who were the main users of the park, were actually dog walkers, because it's an off-leash dog park. And so we started with dogs. The first party we had, apart from the community welcome, was our dog party, which we called Pause Party. Now, this is an advanced version. It didn't look like this when we started. We were very lo-fi. This is what they look like now. We started with pause parties. One of the great things about dogs is that they will go up to each other and sniff each other's backsides and say hello and greet each other without, like stranger dogs. So that's what they do. And as we realized, this is fantastic because they will do what humans won't do. And so we had these events that ran like once, I think they started once every few months. And then we realized this is a fantastic way of creating a community around dogs. And so then we ran it once a month, and it still runs once a month, enabling, you know, people to meet each other through their dogs to meet each other. And then in terms of permissions, again, and invitations, we built this for the dogs, which is an obstacle course, also for the humans. So every time we roll this out at any event, like there was a war between the dogs and the kids as to who would use this particular course the most. But it was really successful because, of course, the dogs loved it to the extent that they knew no matter what happened, they were just going to get a pile of treats. So they loved coming to this place as well, and we provided all the treats. We've had this updated now. It's sort of a more permanent. I mean, it is modular, but it's more permanent. So we did dogs. We also know that nothing makes people feel safer than having kids in public places, because if the kids are there, then it's probably all right. And if kids are there en masse, then it's, you know, then it's fantastic. And of course, they are the masters of play. And so we made a lot of things for kids. We had an outdoor play day in the middle of winter. And there was about people just sort of slowly started to come. And when they saw all the activities, they were just word of mouth. You've got to come here, you've got to check this out. And the place just filled with kids and families. This is what the obstacle course. We made this. Oh my goodness, one of my favorites. But often your favorite is the one that like goes the worst. So it was fantastic. It went really well until kids worked out they could smash the crap out of it. And so they were there jumping on it and tearing it up. And after a while, like, it just became this like mat of hay. Then community got really upset, like, oh, what's that? And so then we decided, okay, well, let's repurpose it. And then we had it all moved to the side so community could take it home and put it on their gardens. And so they did, they came and collected it. Beautiful. And as you saw from the video, we made this a bike pump track. And Lucy Bailey from UC, she ran this program, legendary human that she is, for kids, teaching kids how to ride bikes and also how to fix your bikes. And we made a nature play space, which was so popular that the community petitioned to have it kept in place, and it's still there today, although it's falling apart. But anyway. Right, so that's kids and dogs. And obviously we managed to get adults through kids and dogs and through these big events. This was a tougher crowd. It always is. I'm working on a project now and that baffles the crap out of me still, to get teenagers to come. But this was such a successful program. So we ran this in the car park. It was called the Car Park Jam, and it brought all these dance crews from around the ACT to come and perform in a competition. Unbelievable, it gives me goosebumps. That was one of the best programs that we ran, and like so vital, you know, anyway, just teenagers at their best. This one, on the other hand, this was my idea. This is my great shame, which was, I wanted to see what happens if you try and bring older folk into the park, because it's one of the things I care about. It was cold, like for a lot of the 6 months. And I thought, what happens if I can create some kind of intergenerational exchange? So I arranged for Canberra Seniors card group, and I organised a bus. I brought them up to the park, and then I set up this makeshift crappy thing, including blankets, and they had a gas heater. Oh, they were so patient. And then, but beautifully, then Ainsley, because we had a partnership with Ainsley Primary School, they came down. So we would have this group of like 40 or 50 kids who would come down, and they would play games alongside. So they would have their activities. It'd be cards, it'd be, you know, like physical games, and we provided some of those physical games, or they played chess. And as you can see there, they engaged in particular ways. They never ended up playing cards with the ladies, because the ladies were very like, you know, we just want to play cards how we play. But I always had about 4 packets of Tim Tams, which was naughty. And so the kids would come up and, you know, be nice, and then grab it, they'd be given a Tim Tam. And then this beautiful letter turned up. Dear ladies, are you having a good time playing your card game? Just so you know, I love your Tim Tams. Have a good game. So the Canberra Senior Centre, although it didn't work in Haig Park, and it is a testament to what happens when you don't have, you know, accessible amenity, this activity really was. But what happened was the two groups formed a relationship. And so Ainsley Primary School used to go down to the Canberra Senior Centre a lot, and they'd go through Haig Park. All right, thank you. And then the trees, because the trees were an issue. People had an issue with the trees. I had an issue with the trees to start off with. So we tried to find ways of engaging with the trees that help, again, that reconfiguration, something that was familiar, but also something that was different. And this was one of the most, we did many things. I don't have time to tell you all about them, but this was one of the most successful, which is tree climbing. So we had, as it turns out, the Australian champion of tree climbing also works for Transport Canberra and City Services. And so she set up this fantastic opportunity, like brought together all these tree climbers for humans of all ages and sizes. This is my daughter having a go at this, to be up in the trees. Beautiful. Now, one of the main things I have learnt doing these kinds of activities is that you need to make sure that people themselves are engaging. So I wanted to make Haig Park a laboratory of the possible. I wanted the visitors themselves to dismantle things and make things anew. So most of the activities, they weren't show, they weren't watch. We did have performances, but that was background to make, try, do. And for each of these, because you need to give people permission to play, you can't just leave it out there. We had creatives who scaffolded these activities, just enabling people to learn how to play and feel safe to do so. So this fantastic thing was one of our installations. It was a bitch to ride, but a fabulous thing nevertheless, and it's called the art cart. And it basically meant that community could organise their own activities, and we would ride this cart to wherever the activity was supposed to be. And inside it was a kettle, some coffee and tea, and you could have some art materials, and there were chairs, about 10 to 15, believe it or not, it held 10 to 15 chairs underneath. And so you could pull that out, and a table. And we had many community activities all over the park, particularly during school holidays. Whoever had to ride it, I never rode it. I couldn't even get it to move, but they grew very fit over the period of the time. And then we just did this. Every single activity we did, we brought Circus Warehouse in to teach kids how to do circus activities. We had so much of this going on everywhere. Easy making activities, bonbons for Christmas, lanterns for the Festival of the Forest. We had then, I thought a lot about markets because one of the biggest requests was for markets. And I realised the problem with markets is it's just observe, consume, buy. And I wanted to make the market concept much more about doing. And so we had what was called a do-it-yourself village, the DIY village. So every activity, you weren't buying, you weren't consuming, you were making and doing. And so this guy, he actually is an ex-UC student, and he and his mate are the inspiration for the film Paper Planes. So they won the Australian paper plane competition. Such a good story. When I found that out, I was like, oh. And so he came down and he made a paper plane runway and taught everybody how to make paper planes at DIY Village. This is Lady Tradies. They're amazing. And they set up this space for kids to make cheese boards, which is wonderful. We had this everywhere. Box City, talking about, dismantling and making things anew. This was popular and quite easy to roll out. But it wasn't just for kids. We also had, beeswax wraps, lots of things around trees, planting trees. We bought 20 easels, and for most of our activities, we just put the easels out in the park and set up something where people could use paint or charcoal or whatever. And we always had, mostly Naomi Zauer, who now works at UC, she would facilitate these activities. We didn't do much at night because it genuinely was cold and frightening and there were no lights. This is one we did do, which was a workshop with one of the two people who didn't come from Canberra, this is called the Festival of Light. And it's basically just these LED things that you spin around. And it was actually a photography workshop. So you learn how to take these incredible photos in this space. It's one of them. Okay, so the conditions of play, the last two I want to talk about are this combination of the familiar and the novel. We tried to bring them together as much as possible just to stop. We didn't want anything to be too novel, but we didn't want anything to be, so familiar as to not actually just dismantle. So the Haig Park pause parties were built on puns. They're all about puns. This was our playful way. So this is Santa Pause. And Santa Paws came to all of the Christmas Paws parties and didn't take photos. I mean, kids were allowed to stand around, but he was all about the dog. And so he would have the treats and the dog would sit on his lap, you know, and he would talk to the dog and, you know, woof, woof. All artists again, all creative led. This was a way of trying to get people to rethink what to do with their litter. So this is actually a ballot box that we repurposed for people's cigarette butts because the place was littered with cigarette butts and you know, and bottle tops lids. So we just used this, and then people could vote with their garbage. You know, are we doing Floriade or summer gnats, puppies or kittens, sky whale or Telstra Tower? Okay, one of my favourites is slow-mo cricket. This is an arts-led activity. Everyone knows what cricket is, but not everyone likes cricket. Not everyone wants to play cricket, and people feel excluded from it because it's a skills thing. So if we go back to puckleball, this is kind of based on puckleball. Slow-mo cricket is just two artists. One is the referee, and one, as you can see there, is holding a cricket ball on a really large pole. And what happens is that everybody, the batsman, the bowler, the referee, and the fielders are operating in slow-mo. So you would hold the ball, and then the artist would move the ball with you like that. And then the ball would go, and the artist would choose to do whatever the artist chose to do with that. So it might actually bounce towards you, and you go to hit it slowly. Then suddenly it would be there, and then there, and then catching it. You know, people, and then even clapping. People were just like, yes. This slow-mo cricket was amazing, and we rolled that out quite a few times. People loved it. And then methodologies, and like the evaluation was overseen by Kate Holland. Thank you, the wonderful Kate Holland. We had a lot of traditional methods, but we also used some creative methodologies. The reason for having these creative approaches to evaluation is that often like evaluation just feels extractive, and that's not playful and it's not engaging. And so what we wanted to do was for these methodologies to, you know, contribute to positive perceptions rather than actually trying to capture those perceptions. So we layered that up. Here's one. So this, we needed a seat near where the nature play was. And so we got Bird, you might recognise this artist, Bird and Hannah Hoyne. So they designed this very bright, colourful post box. Right at the end there, like there's all these things that you can write, like there's this, you know, writing paper and pens and crayons, and you could write messages to the park and let us have your feedback at the same time as sitting and watching. Our caretakers, as they were going around and meeting with people, they were also conducting participant observation. So they were seeking everyday feedback in those engagements, and then they were recording those for evaluation purposes. And we collected a lot of stories. So we took the Humans of New York model, if you know that, where someone just goes around and takes photos, and we made dogs of Haig because it just meant that, you know, something that people love. I mean, people love a dog. Most people love a dog. Certainly in Haig Park, there's lots of dog love. And so we took the dogs that were frequently there, like we captured those stories and we turned them into posters, and we had them at all our events. And the amazing thing was that most of these dogs were rescue dogs, and so they all came, I had no idea, but they all came with these beautiful stories. This one by two artists, this is Lisa Petheram and Deb Cleland. They invented Where in the Park is Douglas Santiago? And they were Detective Pinus Radiata and Detective Cedrus Diodara, and they collected clues to solve the mysterious case of the missing Haig Park master plan. So they invented this whole thing themselves. And then they had this table, like everything was so lo-fi, I can't tell you how lo-fi it was, with prompts and props to attract engagement. And then they used this format to ask these probing questions about people's experience of the park and turned it into reports for us. Denise Thwaites isn't here today, but she conducted the Forage Stories program. It was the final stage in her blockumentary research project, and it's basically she went around and collecting stories as if they were coming, like as if these stories were from a community garden. And so there was performative and community engaged and digital modes of research. I'm going to just quickly play this. So this is Denise conducting this. Might see some familiar faces. Bad stuff. Beautiful, thank you. That's just like, would you say, Kate, like just as like a suicide of what actually occurred over the 6 months? Unbelievable. The outcomes, and of course this project was about outcomes, but we didn't use an outcomes-based method. We had 30,000 people visit Haig Park during that time. All these percentages are a bit outrageous. I know the video says 85% of people in Canberra had positive feelings. That's garbage. 85% of people that we collected the data from, which is probably about 1,500 people, had positive feelings. So let's just clean that up. But, you know, this increase in dwell time was huge. And this was like daily use, not those events. So we weren't taking like this data from the big events, but from this, like just from everyday use. 3,000% increase in play. Woo! Weirdly, community, only 2 or 3 people complained about like blowing $1 million on these temporary activations. I was waiting for it. The attacks, like, what are you doing? It's taxpayers' money. Where's the outcomes? But people, I don't know, it was amazing. And people learnt to use the park in diverse ways. The most important outcome was that actually we did transform this place from, not to say it's not ever unsafe, but certainly massive transformation and the indicator for us was the women's safety map, but also the number of people who now use the park, including the number of women, which is larger than the number of men, which wasn't the case before. But in the 3.5 years since this experiment finished, there's only been 2 pins from women on that map, whereas before it like had, you know, the most pins in Canberra, which is a significant outcome. And we also set it up as a place for experimentation. Almost there. We employed 230 artists over this time. We engaged 26 community organisations, 7 education institutions. And a lot of the Haig Park creative placemaking models have been replicated around the ACT, like they've been used at Gin and Dairy and Dairy Road. Some of it's been trialled by Mingle, who's the Suburban Land Agency. They use it in their Mingle program. Lovely feedback from the community. This one made me happy. Honestly, having a multi-use green space with regular and varied community events has improved my mental health massively these past few months. I feel more connected and in tune with Canberra as a people and a place. But this is my favourite. This comes from Anna Vito. It was just about, I was just listening to it because it was advertising an event we were running. The redemption of Haig Park, I think, is the most amazing redemption arc of any narrative ever told. Any narrative ever told. They're doing a lot of work. It's spectacular, and you know, hats off to the people involved in activating Haig Park. How good is that? I've used that everywhere. It's like a doona, and I've got a shirt made out of it and all those things. So what happened next? Well, you know what happened next for those of you who've seen the park. The visitations continue to increase, and we still have an ongoing program of events, although we're rolling that back now. But there's been $3 million of investment in improvements, including safety improvements and accessibility improvements, so lighting and paths and footpaths in Haig Park. And this beauty, yep, there it is, beautiful. So this is the Sue Salthouse Community Centre, which is in honour of sort of the icon, like the icon of accessibility in town, and veiled to Sue Salthouse. So this was built as an homage to her, and so it's a place we were trying to. There was a lot of argument about what the kind of the indoor space would be, but eventually we fought very hard for a community centre rather than a stage, so that everybody could use it. Particularly because we'd had such, and it was a battle because the government originally wanted a pavilion, which wouldn't have been able to be used by many people at all. And then we've got this, of course, which is Haig Park Markets, which happens every week and is jam-packed. But apart from all the wonderful artists and academics that I worked with, these people are my greatest inspo. These two came to every single event. They hated it from day one to the end. They took photos. They were there. They took photos of every event. They recorded every single thing that we did. They were at everything. They sent complaints to Gov. People are part. I put like happy children with bubbles and whatever. They still complained because they couldn't park in their area. The wonderful thing was we captured them at every single event, and then I got to use them and say, these people have been like really contributed to the numbers and the dwell time, like increasing they were one of the most consistent and regular attendees at our events. Thanks for playing. And that's the story of Haig Park. Thanks for listening. I'm sorry, I haven't left much time for questions. Any questions?
Brilliant project, Cathy.
Thank you.
Absolute knockout. 2 questions. One, especially at the beginning of the project, how did you actually communicate the offering to the local community? And secondly, how did you measure dwell time?
Yes, that's a good question. So how did we communicate? So Dionysus Cultural Development, who are a sort of events team, had a communication, but they were in charge of communication. It's a really good question because we fought our guts out to actually not have to promote the activities through the government. It was the biggest battle. Like we arm wrestled with them for ages because, you know, like advertising purely through the City Renewal Authority website would have been a disaster. And so we managed to secure what was Haig Park Facebook. And that grew and grew and grew. They just recently shut it down without letting us know. And so I've lost all that data, which is like makes my eyeballs like fill with tears because there was so much fantastic data which we could have mined if we still had it. Anyway, but that was the effective way. So it became that was the main form of communication, and then we used traditional channels, and then it was word of mouth. What was the second question? We had audits. We had place audits. So we had place audits from Tate Network, and they have Inhabit Place has a specific place audit where they would highlight and where they would identify how long humans have been in that space for who's been there and for how long. And so I don't actually know the formula they were using. And then we also had, when we did our audits, we had people actually watching, just focusing on, like in everyday ways, just focusing on how long that human's in the park. So we would take sample sizes. Yeah.
So for reasons that need to come up today, I've been knocking on every door on the Turner and O'Connor side of Haig Park. And something that comes up a lot is just jealousy. They really want to see what's happened on the Braddon side. But from my experience, they are all still consistently raising safety. So everything that's on the west side of Haig Park is still perceived as dangerous, as unsafe after dark. A lot of the women that I talk to on that side of the park won't use it. They'll go to Northbourne and you know, because it's more visible. Do you think it's just rolling out the same thing? What do you think are the really key activations, particularly maybe without $1 million price tag?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like we can talk about how clever we were, but in the end, it was $1 million. And I always say that it's $1 million. That's a lot of money, to roll this out. So again, it's a good question, Martin. When we tried to activate that end of the park, there was a lot of pushback, like a lot of pushback. Because people down that, particularly down the furthest, like the Turner end, have a real sense of ownership over, a custodianship over that space. And they came and they complained at everything. The generator's too loud. The dogs are making too much noise. And so eventually, and we tried a lot of things, and eventually the government decided that investment there was not worth it. What was supposed to happen, because we actually were trying to make that Turner end where the nature play is the kids' place. So we deliberately put the Haig Park, the nature play there, and we had the bike pump track down the road because Turner's school's there. We've got the German preschool there. It just made perfect sense. But the government decided to put all of their investment in the community. So they were basically going to build a fantastic nature play down there. So grow what we already had. And the money was going to be split between the community centre and the nature play. But government machinations meant that the money went to Watson's play space and then to the community centre. So what to do, I think actually that a foundation is there already in that Haig Park nature play. So it's really building on that. Yeah, but we don't need $1 million to do it. Owen?
Thanks, Cathy. The conditions of play schema that you used, where's that from?
It's an amalgam.
Okay.
It's an amalgam. It's mine, but from amalgam of, you know, play theory, like from both development theory, psychological theory, around play and animals as well. So it's a mix.
Okay, maybe I'll borrow it off you sometime so I can quote it. Yeah, thanks.
That's okay. Thanks, Cathy. What does activation look like in the outer suburbs, Ginninderry and places like that? Is it different?
Yeah, it is different because it's a different community. So out at Ginninderry, well, first of all, that community is new. So there isn't, it's a blank canvas basically in terms of how people feel about the space, which is both good, as it is an opportunity. And so what we're doing is we're working with community out there, which is more multicultural. So much larger proportions of people from the subcontinent than other places. And so we're basically trying to build community around festivals that might be shared. So the students from UC came up with this fantastic idea, which was a kite festival. So magnificent because it's actually really windy out there. So like leveraging the negative of the place by turning it into a positive. That's what play's about. It's strengths-based, right? And then kite festivals, you know, are, you know, it's something that you will see, you know, in India and Bangladesh and other places. And so we just had again, a combination of somebody who makes these, an artist who makes incredible kites flying, and then people could come and make their own kites. And then we just had people of all, like community of all ages flying kites, but even better, and I hadn't thought of it, because they're up in the sky, people could see it from miles away and they would just flock. So they would just flock. So I'm just like, okay, I will be flying kites everywhere because people will come. Yeah.
Thank you so much for today. It's really inspiring on a number of levels. As a new resident of Braddon, actually, it's really nice to hear the kind of history there. And I'm just interested in how you found engagement by that older adult population. I know you've shared the card sort of intergenerational thing didn't necessarily work, but did you notice a kind of engagement in other ways for that population?
Yeah, and again, it's really about, thank you, it's a good question. And so we did have, like, you know, your inner older cool, older adults, your 65 pluses, you know, your black cool, they came to everything always. But if you're talking about older adults who you may not see in the park, we actually, so we built a labyrinth, but it was an artwork. And as it turns out, Girraween Lodge, which is just next door, turns out is the home, and you know, serendipity, is the home of like some of Canberra's like biggest labyrinth fans. And so although it was an artwork, and as it started to kind of disintegrate, they wanted to see, you know, that remain in place. And so they tended to it and they took care of it. And then they were bringing a lot of labyrinth fans into the space. And then we decided that we'd actually build them a new one. And I don't know if you've seen it, but it's really quite beautiful. And they like co-designed it with us. And so it's, you know, it's now sort of permanently in there. But again, without the amenity, so we certainly get more older adults coming, obviously, to Haig Park markets, but without the amenity and without those accessibility points, no one's coming. Yeah, very few people are coming. Yeah, if they don't feel safe and able to access. Anything else? It is, oh my God, 1:30. Nailed it. Thank you for coming, everybody. I'm going to go and have a cuppa. I think that's what Paul does. If anyone wants to join me, please do so. Thanks for listening to the story. Much appreciated.